It began not with a thunderous explosion, but with a whisper. Across the frozen Russian steppe, German soldiers huddled in their trenches, eyes straining against a darkness so complete it felt like a physical weight. No engine rumble, no air raid siren, just a soft, ethereal rustle as if the night itself had begun to breathe. The veterans knew that sound. They called it the brush of a witch's broom. And when the whisper suddenly stopped, the ground erupted in silent fire. The night witches had arrived. In October 1941, with the Wehrmacht at the gates of Moscow, a legendary aviator named Marina Raskova walked into Stalin's office. She was already a national icon, a hero of the Soviet Union for her record-breaking long-distance flights. Now, she demanded permission to do the unthinkable, raise entire combat aviation regiments composed solely of women. Stalin, desperate for every available pilot, agreed. Raskova received more than 2,000 applications from girls aged 17 to 26, students, teachers, factory workers, farmhands. From them she forged 3 units, a fighter regiment, a dive bomber regiment, and the 588th Night Bomber Regiment. No one imagined that this last unit, handed the most archaic aircraft in the Soviet arsenal, would terrorize the German army for 3 straight years. The aircraft was a relic that male pilots openly mocked, the Polikarpov Po-2, a 1928 biplane originally built as a crop duster and primary trainer. Its airframe was a patchwork of plywood, canvas, and wood glue. It had open cockpits, no radio, no armor, and a tiny 5-cylinder engine that could barely push the plane to 94 miles per hour, slower than the stall speed of a Messerschmitt 109. A Po-2 could carry only a handful of small bombs, and it could be outrun by a car on a highway. Yet this fragile machine possessed a secret that would make it the most terrifying night weapon of the war. The secret lay in its engine. As the pilots neared their target, flying at treetop height, they would throttle back and then cut the ignition entirely. The radial engine coughed once and fell silent. The propeller windmilled slowly, and the Po-2 became a silent glider, slicing through the dark with only the faintest noise. A soft, swishing whisper as the wind slipped over the fabric wings and hummed through the bracing wires. To the German soldiers below, that sound was not mechanical. It was organic, spectral. It seeped into their nightmares, a harbinger of destruction that gave no warning until the bombs were already leaving the racks. On the night of June 8, 1942, 3 Po-2s of the 588th Regiment lifted off from a dirt strip near the Mias River, commanded by squadron leader Yevdokia Bershinskaya. Their target was a German-held bridge. The biplanes approached without a sound. Engines cut. A few heartbeats of ghostly silence, then the bombs struck. The bridge was damaged, enemy soldiers scattered in panic, and the fragile aircraft melted back into the darkness, untouched. That first mission was a tiny tactical success, but an immense psychological victory. German after-action reports puzzled over an attack with no aircraft seen or heard. The legend of the Nachthexen, the Night Witches, had begun. The Luftwaffe was baffled. Night fighter squadrons, armed with radar and cannons, scrambled to intercept the silent intruders. But the Po-2 was maddeningly elusive. A fast Messerschmitt or Focke-Wulf, barreling in at over 300 mph, would overshoot the crawling biplane in seconds. The Po-2 could turn inside a football field, hugging the ground, disappearing into the folds of the terrain. German flak batteries lit up the sky with curtains of anti-aircraft fire. Searchlights swept the clouds. Yet the tiny, non-reflective plywood planes slipped through again and again. An exasperated Luftwaffe ace later confessed that shooting down a night witch was like trying to hit a fly with a hammer. The regiment's operational tempo defied belief. A single crew would fly 8, 10, sometimes 18 missions in a single night. The drill was savage. Take off, fly to the target, drop bombs, return to a field lit by nothing but a faint lantern, land, and immediately be swarmed by the all-female ground crews. These women reloaded the bombs and refueled the plane by hand in total blackness, their fingers freezing on the metal. The navigator often had to cradle a 50-kilogram bomb in her lap during takeoff, because the underwing racks were already overloaded. Within 5 minutes, the Po-2 was back in the air, its engine spluttering back to life for another silent run. Hardship was their constant companion. The Po-2 offered no protection from the elements. In winter, temperatures plunged to minus 40 degrees Celsius. The pilots and navigators, sitting in open cockpits, faced a wind chill that froze their goggles to their skin and turned their hands into numb claws. Frostbite was routine. They navigated by compass, stopwatch, and a dim flashlight shielded in a hand. There was no radio to call for help. Parachutes were often discarded to save weight for more bombs. Captivity was unthinkable. The Germans executed captured female aircrew on sight. Some pilots carried a single grenade, preferring a quick end to falling into enemy hands, and still they flew. Their targets were chosen for maximum psychological chaos: fuel depots, ammunition dumps, rail junctions, bivouac troops. The pattern of attack became a script of terror. First, the whisper would drift across the line, a sound so eerily organic that hardened soldiers later said it was worse than the scream of a dive bomber. Then the whisper would abruptly stop, leaving a vacuum of silence that stretched nerves to the breaking point. Finally, the sky ripped apart in concussive flashes as bombs walked across the target. By the time searchlights snapped on, the Po-2 had already coughed its engine back to life and vanished. The Germans had a name for those last seconds: the silence before hell. The Germans, scrambling to explain the supernatural attacks, spread dark rumors. They claimed the pilots were female criminals injected with chemicals that gave them feline night vision. The swishing sound of the plywood wings was said to be the rush of a witch's broomstick. The name Nachthexen, night witches, was born not from Soviet propaganda, but from the terrified imagination of the German frontline soldier. Far from dispelling the myth, the regiment embraced it. Some navigators even sketched a witch on a broomstick as a nose art emblem, laughing as they climbed into their fragile chariots. Desperate to stop the night witches, the German High Command issued extraordinary orders. They offered the Iron Cross, Germany's highest bravery award, to any pilot who shot one down. Special searchlight battalions were deployed, creating walls of light along the biplanes' approach routes. Flak batteries formed dense kill zones. The Luftwaffe even experimented with slow-flying Storch observation planes to hunt the Po-2 at its own speed. Yet the witches adapted. They flew in mutually protective pairs, one plane drawing the searchlights while the other struck from the dark. They learned to navigate by the stars and the faint glow of burning cities. The psychological toll on the Wehrmacht was catastrophic. Entire units suffered from whisper paranoia, flinching at the sound of the wind. One Luftwaffe pilot, Oberfeldwebel Joseph Kosiak, made a grim specialty of hunting the Po-2s. Flying a Bf-109 adapted for night operations, he downed 4 of them in a single July night in 1943, a loss that shook the regiment to its core. But the night witches held an emergency council, shifted their routes, and returned the very next evening with redoubled ferocity. Kosiak himself died in a crash weeks later, and his kills became a footnote. The Whispering Wings were never grounded for long. In the autumn of 1943, during the grueling Kerch-Eltigen amphibious operation, the regiment faced its fiercest trial. Flying from forward airstrips just miles from the front, they bombed German positions night after night in atrocious weather, guiding landing forces with their exhaust flames. That campaign earned them the Guards designation. They became the 46th Guards Tammen Night Bomber Aviation Regiment. But the cost was bitter. On a freezing August night, navigator Galina Dokutovich's Po-2 was coned by searchlights and torn apart by flak. She was 23 years old. Her body was never recovered. For every metal pin to a tunic, there was an empty bunk and a name crossed off the flight roster. Through 3 unrelenting years, the numbers grew monstrous. The Night Witches flew over 23,000 combat sorties, dropped more than 3,000 tons of bombs and 26,000 incendiary shells. 23 of their women were awarded the title Hero of the Soviet Union, the nation's highest honor. 2 pilots, Nadezhda Popova and Irina Sebrova, received the Gold Star twice. Popova alone logged 852 missions, a tally almost unthinkable in any air force. Yekaterina Ryabova, the regiment's most prolific navigator, flew 860 sorties and once bombed a railway junction so thoroughly that the fireball could be seen 30 miles away. These were not statistics. They were schoolgirls, seamstresses, milkmaids who had become the scourge of the Eastern Front. The cost of such glory was staggering. 30 aircrew were killed in action, dozens more were wounded. The all-female ground crews worked in a frenzy through every night, repairing shattered struts, patching bullet-riddled canvas with glue and fabric, swapping engines that had been shot to pieces. A single incendiary round could turn a Po-2 into a flying torch in seconds. The women on the ground would watch their friends' planes climb into the dark and sometimes see a distant bloom of fire, and know that another bunk would be empty at dawn. They mourned for an hour, then reloaded the bombs for the next sortie. Their unofficial motto was carved into their hearts: "You fly until you die, or until the war ends." In April 1945, the Night Witches were transferred to the Oder Front. On the night of April 20, they bombed Berlin. The failing Nazi capital, wrapped in smoke and desperation, heard for the first time the ghostly whisper of plywood wings. For 2 weeks, the regiment flew night after night over the dying city, striking supply lines, SS headquarters, and fortified positions. When the red flag rose over the Reichstag, the women of the 46th Guards were among the Soviet forces ringing the capital. They had flown from the burning steppes of the Donbass to the burning heart of the enemy, all in a wooden biplane that most pilots refused to fly. In addition to bombs, the regiment sowed psychological havoc with thousands of leaflets. Printed in flawless German, they warned, "The Night Witches know where you sleep. We will come again." Ground crews, meanwhile, became masters of battlefield improvisation, patching wings with cloth torn from abandoned farmhouses, melting down tin cans to seal leaking fuel tanks, and using blowtorches to coax frozen engines to life. A Po-2 riddled with 40 bullet holes could be flying again by the following dusk. When the guns fell silent, the Night Witches were quietly disbanded. The Soviet Union elevated its male aces to legendary status, while the thousands of women who had fought were pushed to the margins of official history. Nadezhda Popova survived the war and lived until 2013, her Moscow apartment a small museum of faded photographs and memories. When asked about fear, she would smile and say, "The night was our comrade." Commander Yevdokia Bershinskaya, the iron-willed leader who never lost a pilot under her direct care, became a modest public figure, speaking little of the terror but much of the sisterhood. They held reunions until age and time thinned their ranks, the whisper of the Po-2's engine a sound only they could still hear. The legacy of the Night Witches refuses to fade. They proved that obsolete technology, wielded with audacity and precision, could overcome the most advanced war machine. More than that, they shattered every assumption about what women could endure and achieve in combat. Their weapon was not speed or firepower, it was silence and nerve. In the decades that followed, soldiers in conflicts far from the Eastern Front have reported an uneasy feeling on quiet nights, an irrational shiver when the wind hums through the trees or whistles across a wire. Because somewhere in the deep memory of warfare, the Nachthexen still ride the wind. On October 15, 1945, the regiment was officially disbanded. Its pilots and navigators returned to civilian life as quietly as they had flown. Many became teachers, doctors, engineers, the very roles they had left in 1941. But the night sky never forgot them. In 1981, a Soviet film, Night Witches in the Sky, brought their story to a new generation. And today, monuments stand in the Taman Peninsula and at their old airfields, whispering their names to the wind. In the 21st century, their legacy inspires female combat pilots around the world, proving that the sky has no gender, only courage. Years after the war, a German veteran was asked what sound haunted him most from the Eastern Front. He paused for a long moment, his eyes fixed on a distant point. "The broom," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "It was like a witch gliding over your grave." Then he added, "We knew they were women, that made it worse." The night witches have landed for the last time. Their plywood planes have returned to dust, but the night sky still remembers. And if you stand alone on a moonless evening, far from the lights of the city, and hear the faintest breath of air stirring the silence, listen. It might be the wind, or it might be the echo of 23,000 missions, the wings of forgotten heroines, still whispering through the dark. Today, a restored Po-2 hangs in a Moscow museum, its fabric skin still bearing the tiny patches stitched by ground crews long gone. Schoolchildren press their noses against the glass, and the guide points to the silent engine and says, "This is how they won the war, not with a roar, but with a whisper." Their whisper echoes not just in history books, but in every young girl who looks to the sky and dares to soar. The night witches prove that the greatest power is not in force, but in the refusal to be silenced. Forever they ride the dark wind, guardians of the quiet hours, a testament that even the smallest light can shatter the deepest night. This is the true, undying legacy of the Nachtvechsen. Listen, they still fly, forever.